and it's right there. So we'll just jump right in. I'll jump right in by giving a little bit of a survey of what we talked about before for those who weren't here last week or need a little bit of a reminder. So we're looking at the rules of triage about how you decide when care can't be given to all people, how you decide who takes precedence, who gets care first. And so we started with early rabbinic sources. Oh, just happened here. Okay, we started with some early rabbinic sources. What's going on here? Okay, so we started with some early rabbinic sources, the Gemara and Pesachim, which said that you can't really choose one life over the other, but it left it with a rhetorical question of who's to say whose blood is redder. And we spent a little bit of time looking at the question, whether that's a rhetorical question or that's an actual sincere question. If it's a rhetorical question, meaning one can never decide whose blood is redder than someone else, because all blood, you have no ability to decide whose life takes precedence. But there was another opinion that said, well, it's not necessarily a rhetorical question. There are some instances where you actually can determine person A's blood is redder and more valuable, and their life is more valuable than person B. And so we entertained that idea and that's somewhat of what's happening in the times of when we're triaging corona patients. Trying to weigh, well, maybe there is a way that we can determine whose life is more valuable than someone else and someone else should take precedence. We also looked at, there was a Mishnah in Horiot, and the Mishnah in Horiot seemed to say explicitly that when saving a life, a man takes precedence over a woman, a Kohen over a Levi over Yisrael, and they gave a whole hierarchy of whose life is more valuable. But we saw that virtually no one accepts that. I shouldn't say virtually, absolutely. No one accepts that in practice, and no one practices in accordance with that Mishnah in Horiot because variety of reasons. Some said that, I don't remember if we saw Rav Herschel Schachter, but we'll see him later today. But for a variety of reasons, people are not going to entertain, they're not going to follow that Mishnah in Horiot, but it still exists in the books. And so you'll see different people are going to have to address that Mishnah in Horiot to sort of say why, even though it seems to give a clear precedence, you have two people come into the hospital, one's male, one's female, and you can't determine, and you can only save one of them, who you should save. The Mishnah doesn't seem to say, it says explicitly, you save the male over the female. So if that, we're going to have to deal with how we address that Mishnah in Horiot when it comes to practice. So we could start. We'll say that in source number 8 on that source sheet is what Rav Herschel Schachter says, where he basically says, in this eighth source, Mishnah Sof Horiot, you have a Mishnah in Horiot, which says that a man takes precedence over a woman. He says that Nira shehakovea bazeh hu shemakdim lahatil zeh sheakila tzricha lo biyoter. Rav Schachter says the implication of that Mishnah in Horiot, which says you save certain people, you save men over women, a Kohen over a Levi over Yisrael over a convert over a mamzer, all these different things. The presumption of the Mishnah was that a male Kohen was going to be significantly more valuable to the community than someone else. And so that person is going to take precedence, or the Talmid Chacham is going to take precedence over an Am Ha'aretz. Someone who knows a lot of Torah is going to take precedence over someone who knows very little Torah. And Rav Schachter says that he thinks that that's presumably on the basis of an assumption of who the community will value more. And Rav Schachter says, Shekasha lasot maseh al pi klalei hamishna b'li iyun gadol. He says it's very, very hard to actually do in practice where you save the person that's more crucial to society, because it's impossible to tell. And Rav Schachter points out that he says maybe in the times of the Mishnah, it was a fair assumption that your average male was literate and learned some Torah, and your average female was illiterate and didn't learn any Torah. So then you can maybe be able to make this assumption that your average man knows more Torah than your average woman, and so your average man has more to give to the community as far as Torah knowledge than the average woman, so therefore he would take precedence over her. But Rav Schachter says, but that's impossible to say nowadays, and you can never assume someone's ability to what a person can give to society. And so using the Mishnah Horiot is off the table because it assumes certain things about society that our society just doesn't have. That Mishnah assumed you could very easily determine who is an asset to the Jewish community, and I think the Mishnah is thinking within the Jewish community. The Mishnah it's Judeo-centric, right? It's thinking about Jews, and we're gonna say that you have to save non-Jews as well, but that's in the Mishnah's mind, there's a difference qualitatively between the requirement or responsibility of saving a Jew versus a non-Jew. Even though in practice, absolutely we save. But the Mishnah seems to recognize that. Even for Rav Schechter, I think he acknowledges that. In practice, everyone's going to say you save a life, regardless of religion, regardless of creed, regardless of anything. But he's saying, looking at the text here, it seems to give that precedence. And I think what he's saying is that maybe there was a time when you could evaluate. I mean, I don't know what hospital policies are today, but if you have someone, a paramedic who comes into the hospital, who saving this person's life could then result in them saving 3 more lives versus someone who's not in the healthcare profession. I don't know if hospitals will choose to treat someone in a medical caring profession before, partially because they realize that that's an essential. Saving this person, they're more valuable in our hospital. I don't mean to say that lives are more valuable than the others, but we're talking about triage where you're going to have to only save one, and the hospital may make the decision, well, we're going to save this doctor because this doctor could then save other people. We save this other person, it's going to stop with them. They may save them, but there's no one else that they can save. So that's part of what's going on in the mind of Rav Schechter. But Rav Schechter is saying that it's impossible really to know as far as what the Mishnah says, to say, oh, we have a Mishnah here that says explicitly what you're supposed to do. Rav Schechter says you got to throw that Mishnah out because there's no way the rules of how people are assets to the community is not it's not true for Horiot anymore. So that's an interesting idea, and it presents that if you could know how valuable someone is, maybe they would take precedence. But to blindly follow the Mishnah in Horiot and say, well, the Mishnah says that you have to save a male over a female, so we're going to save a male over a female. Rav Schechter says that has to be thrown out. We can't practice that way because we don't know who's actually more valuable in the community. Assuming, I don't think we looked at these sources last time, so we'll really get started with source number 9. Okay. So there was an article in the Times. That's from last month. So I don't know. What does it say? What do they conclude? Didn't read it yet. Okay, so you'll read it. And my understanding from the research that I've done and listening to different people talk about this topic is that the position that sometimes you have halacha takes position A and the rest of the world takes position B, and there's a challenge there when you have a doctor who wants to keep halacha but is bound by the policies and ethical decisions that the hospital makes, and sometimes they're different. But it's from what I'm gathering is that the way the Jewish law falls out with this, and the way that most hospitals follow their policies for triage are relatively aligned. So I would imagine that this article is going to say, I mean, you'll let us know what it says, but I imagine the article's not going to say anything that's going to be so different from anything anyone else is saying. Do you have a question, Josh, or are you just stretching your fingers?
No, I just want to add that combat medics are not allowed to prioritize based on rank. And so there have been a number of, I don't know if they're famous, but certainly there are well-known instances where back in the day where general officers found themselves on the battlefield, a general officer could be wounded and did not receive priority based on rank. Of course, being shot receives priority over someone with the sniffles, but there were plenty of enlisted soldiers who received priority over others. I believe Patton might actually be an example of that. I would need to double check, but so
there you go. Yeah, I mean that's interesting because you might want to make the argument to say, well, look, someone who's the commander of a battalion or what, they're more of an asset to the army. It's more important for them. You can just replace this infantryman with another infantryman. Like, it doesn't make a difference. So you could maybe make that argument, but so the policy in combat medics is that no, we can't. It's interesting. The Mishnah Horio would say maybe you should, but Rav Shechter is saying, well, it's impossible to tell. It's interesting because Rav Shechter sounds like he's saying it's impractical, but maybe it's doable. And if you have someone with rank, but even so, it's hard to really know how much of an asset each individual is. But it's an interesting thing to sort of think about. The question but I'll just say I think the general practice in hospitals is that they're not treating the wealthier patient over the more financially challenged patient. They're not treating whites over blacks, or, I mean, maybe officially they're not. The standards are saying you're not allowed to do that. I don't know what's actually happening in practice, but as far as what the policy is and what people should be doing, they're not prioritizing group A over group B. And so the question that comes up is, once the decision is made, whether the decision is changeable, meaning you've decided to hook up person A, you've decided to treat person A incorrectly. You said that you see person B is in much more severe state. You hooked up person A to a ventilator, even though person B was much worse, because you decided that you wanted to save person A, or for whatever reason, you thought that it was better to save person A, and then you realize after the fact that really actually saving person B would have been more appropriate because for whatever reason, person B maybe is in a greater chance of death than person A, so really you should have given it to person B. So you've made that decision, so now what? So the Shut Minchat Shlomo, the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in the 9th source here, so he says the following. He says, he says it's very difficult to practice in accordance with that Mishnah in Horio, to say person A takes precedence over person B, just off the bat. Ulam lahavir machshir hanshama mechole leacher shehu b'matzav yoter kashe, o sheyesh l'sheni yoter sikuyim lahatzala misubkani me'od. I think we read this last time, right? But we're reading it again. So he says to change person A, to move it to person B, even though person B is in a much worse situation and they have a better chance, they're doing worse, but if you attach them, they have a better chance of success than person A who's already attached to it. He says, I doubt whether or not you can actually hook them up. He says, and it's because the first one already acquired the ventilator. The first one's got the support already. The first one's got the care already. To then make the decision to move it from person A to person B, once person A is already hooked up, that could be tantamount to killing them. He says, even a doctor, for a doctor to move from patient A to person B, could be tantamount to not only are they exempt from moving person A to person B, but it could be that they're actually killing person A if they remove their care from person A to go to person B. So once you've made the choice, Shlomo Zalman says you can't now fix the choice. So you have to be very careful when you're putting person A versus person B to a ventilator, and you want to make sure you make the right decision, because if you don't make the right decision, you are stuck with the decision that you made. And he says, then he continues, and then he has that statement in brackets where he says, maybe if they have someone who's so, why you have someone who's already attached, hold on, I just lost my train of thought. Someone for whom the ventilator is no longer really prolonging life or sustaining life. It's merely keeping their body moving, but their life is gone. So Shlomo Zalman entertains that maybe it's conceivable in that respect that they're already gone. Their heart may be pumping, their lungs may be breathing, but it's because of this ventilator, but they're not really alive anymore. And Shlomo Zalman, he says that, then initially removes it. He's not entirely sure anymore. because then you start getting into a longer conversation of the definition of death and brain brainstem and what constitutes death. And it goes way off field. Sort of Shlomo Zalman says, I don't want to entertain that anymore, but it's something to at least consider, that someone who's really no longer alive, really not being sustained, they're breathing, but only because of this machine, but they're really not alive. They're not coming back. That maybe in that case, it would be appropriate to remove them from the ventilator so you could save someone else's life, because the quality of life of person A is they're done. And person B, if you attach them, they could actually survive and live. So Shlomo Zalman there, Mark is asking, why do they assume being hooked up to a ventilator means that the patient owns that machine? So it's interesting. I don't know what he means exactly by own. I mean, the Hebrew word that he uses is zacha, that he acquired the device. I don't know if he acquired it, he acquired the right to the device, meaning it's now his. And I think what he has in mind is the Mishnah back that we saw before, that the Mishnah that we had before, that if you're stuck in the desert, the Gemara says if you're stuck in the desert, two people, one has a canteen of water, one doesn't have the canteen of water, you're allowed to drink your own water, and you don't have a responsibility to give up that water. Maybe even it's forbidden for you to give up that water. So I think what Shlomo Zalman is saying, it's sort of the same thing. Once you're attached to the ventilator, it's like your ventilator, and you don't have to give it up. And no one has the right to remove that ventilator from you and give it to someone else, just like I can't remove that water from you and give it to someone else. So, and I think this tshuva sort of reflects a change in his thought, that he initially says it's totally obvious that someone who's brain dead, or he doesn't use the word brain dead, but someone who's no longer, I'll use the exact language that he has. Im al pi rov ze kvar lelo to'elet. If, according to statistical majority, there is no longer a benefit to having person A on this ventilator, Rav Shlomo Zalman initially says it's clear as day, but then he's not so sure, because maybe he's concerned about, if you open up the door and say, yeah, if the doctors decide it's not beneficial anymore, you can totally disconnect the ventilator. Maybe he's concerned about how far that would go, that you're going to have someone, because Mark is, Bernstein is asking like why Shlomo Zalman says something is clear as day, you can remove the person from the ventilator if it's no longer beneficial to them, but then he crosses out clear as day and writes, I think, and then that whole paragraph that says I think is removed from the printed edition. So I think it's because he might be concerned that if he opens the door, if he he's too permissive, he's concerned maybe of doctors behaving inappropriately, or maybe saying, making wrong decisions about, well, this person probably won't survive, but maybe they might survive, I don't know, but they have a kidney and this other person needs a kidney, so we'll just disconnect them and take the kidney. I think he's a little concerned about that happening. I don't know, but he clearly steps back. And I think the general policy, and maybe it's because he also read other tshuvot, which we're going to see now, in general, we're very concerned about giving doctors that freedom to just, once they're already attached, to say, I'm going to physically remove you from the ventilator. But it's a good question. Rav Moshe Sternbach, in this 10th source, he writes here, I'll give you we'll just read the English here. It seems logical that which we wrote when someone is always coming in is considered as if they are both before us. And we see an example of this in the writings of the Chazon Ish, who writes, he rules that an autopsy is permitted when there is a sick person before us, and it doesn't need to be physically before us, but that it exists. Meaning, if you have two people coming in at the same time, they're both wheeled into the hospital on two stretchers, you have to choose one or the other. And the calculus that he was doing was it has to do with who's in a worse state, who needs more immediate care, and who will benefit the greatest from the treatment. If person A will benefit but will likely die anyway, and person B will benefit and will likely live, then person B takes precedence, because we want there to be a net gain in life lived, so we're going to give it to him. I'll give it to him or her, whoever is the person who has the greatest chance of success. And that's only when they are both rolled in at the same time. Now, Rav Moshe Sternbach is saying, let's say you have a situation where there's a pandemic, where there's something going on. So what the Chazon Ish was talking about, you had people dying of a mysterious disease. And ordinarily, we don't allow autopsies, because we're concerned about nivul hamet. We don't want to desecrate the body of a deceased person. But if the autopsy is going to save a life, then you're absolutely saving life takes precedence. So the question was asked, if you have someone who died of a disease that other people have, if we do the autopsy, we can find out what killed them, and then we could use what we know to then save other lives. Can we do that autopsy? And Chazon Ish said, yeah, you can do that autopsy because we have someone sick in front of us. He says, you don't need to be in the hospital and have patient A lying on the bed dying of mysterious disease and you have person B who just died of that mysterious disease. So then you can very clearly see there's a benefit. If I can figure out how Joe died, I can then save Jan because they have the same disease. So the Chazon Ish said, Jan doesn't need to be in the hospital next to you. If you know that there's a Jan somewhere out there, you know there's someone else who has that disease, then that's considered before you, and that's as if they're saying right before you, do the autopsy on Joe so you can save Jan's life, even if Jan's not really in the room. Right? That's what the Chazon Ish said, and so Moshe Sternbuch says it's the same thing for a pandemic here. Two people, what it means to be brought in at the same time does not mean that they're literally wheeled into the hospital at the same time. If Joe comes in, and I know statistically that you're getting 100 plus people admitted to the hospital every day with COVID, some in a very, very bad situation, in a very, very bad state, some in not as bad of a state. So you can hold off and giving care for Joe if you know Jan's going to come in. And if Joe and Jan came in at the same time, you'd obviously give it to Jan before Joe. So even if Jan's not there and only Joe comes in, but you know Jan is going to be coming at some point, because statistically there have been people coming in every day, all day, you can withhold the ventilator from Joe and give it to Jan. Even though ordinarily we'd say, like, but there's only one person in front of you. Shouldn't you save the life that's right in front of you? And Moshe Sternbuch says, but Jan is also in front of you. She might not be in the room, but you know statistically she's coming, so you can hold off the ventilator to make sure that she has it available if she's the one who should get it in this circumstance. And he says the following, which I think is interesting. He says, when we compare this case of a ventilator in the Talmud in Baba Metzia to the Talmud in Baba Metzia about two walking in the desert with only one bottle of water, and we rule like Rabbi Akiva that you can keep your water, and we don't prefer splitting for both people to have temporary life. He says, if you're in the desert, right, the case in Baba Metzia, two people are lost, both one bottle of water. If I drink, I live, and the other person dies. If we both drink, we both die. And the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said, Jared, drink your water. That person, even if that person's going to die, you shouldn't share that so that you should live. Drink the water. It's your water. So he says, Rav Moshe Sternbuch says, the case of a ventilator and the case of water is different. He says, in our case, that one person comes in who won't live long, even with treatment, and one comes in who will live long with treatment. And if we give it to the short life person, now we won't be able to save the long life person. He says, this is not considered splitting the resource. Rather, it is proactively killing the one who can live a long life. Right? He's saying that when you split the water, there was, hold on, let me read this again. He says, Lefizet, give it the show that now we won't be able to give it. I'm going to go back to the Hebrew because I think I messed up with the English translation. Okay, Mihu, Tzarich Bir. He says this is the bottom of the 4th page in the 10th source. Moshe Sternbuch says, however, it requires some analysis, this situation, because in the case of Baba Metzia, where you have two people walking in the desert with one bottle of water, we hold like Rabbi Akiva that your life takes precedence, and so you can drink that water. And accordingly, he says, splitting that bottle of water, that case of the water is only when you have one bottle of water and the other person doesn't have a bottle of water. But let's say there's a situation where you have two people who don't have a bottle of water, and the person, I don't have a water and Mark doesn't have water, and Josh walks in with a bottle of water, and Josh doesn't need the water to live, and he could either give it to me entirely, he could give it to Mark entirely, or he could do nothing, or he could split it. So the only thing that Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia was saying was that if I have the water, I can drink it. But it seems to suggest that if Josh has the water, he can't choose me over Mark or Mark over me. Josh has to split it at most. Thank you, Mark. Mark's saying he'd give it to me. But Rabbi Akiva says you shouldn't. Rabbi Akiva says you should keep it. But thank you. That's very nice of you. Right. the only time that we say your life takes precedence is if it's already in your possession. But if Josh walks onto the scene and he has a bottle of water, he give it to me or give it to Mark, he's not allowed to give it to one or the other. He has to split it. That's what he says the case is in the desert. Because it says, if he gives it to both, they'll live temporarily. If the Moshe Sternbuch says, if you're in the situation where Josh walks in with a bottle of water, he can't choose one or the other. He has to give it to both. We both split. Because water is a splittable resource. He says, but in the case of Lafize, when you're talking about a ventilator, some machine that's keeping people alive, that belongs to the hospital, you could make the argument that it should be the same thing. Josh can't choose one over the other. He just lets both of us maybe should die. You can't, the bottle of water wouldn't make sense to choose Jared over Mark. So in the hospital, you can't choose to give the person, Jared, the ventilator before Mark, the ventilator. And he says, that's not the case. Ulam nira de lo dam. He says, that's not the same. Dehatam efshar lakem shnehem, v'latet et akiton hamayim l'shnehem, v'lakem al kopanim shechliu shnehem chayesha. Says, water is a splittable resource. You could split it, and instead of Jared living, Jared and Mark could both live, instead of both of us living 40 minutes and making it to the destination, we'd both live 20 minutes, but we wouldn't make it to the destination, and we would both die in the desert. Right? He says that you could actually split. And so you have to do that. Because then you have two people living 20 minutes. You have to do that. When it comes to a ventilator, if you were to choose to give, if you have two people, one needs the ventilator, like you choose between two people to have the ventilator. One has the ventilator, might live for a short period of time. We don't know how successful they'll be. And now they're starting to talk about splitting ventilators because they need to, but it's interesting. In his mind, you couldn't really split it. In his mind, it was one or the other. If you give it to me, I'll live a long time. You give it to Mark, he'll live only potentially a short time because he's in a worse medical state and I'm in a stronger medical state. So if you give me the ventilator, I'll probably live longer. Moshe Sternbuch says in that case, you have to definitely make the decision. Josh, as the hospital, is empowered to make the decision to save my life over Mark's because my life will probably last longer statistically than Mark's life. And then it's appropriate to make that decision. The case in the desert, well, that's where you could split it. And so you have to split it. But if you don't split, you can't split the ventilator. And so choosing to give it to Mark over me, Moshe Sternbuch says, is tantamount to killing me because I have a greater chance of survival. He says, because you're actively putting me in a situation, because I have a greater chance to live with the ventilator. When you hook him up to the ventilator instead of me, you're proactively shortening my life, is what he says. And so you have the right. Yes, he's presuming projected length of life, the ultimate determinant. Yes, he's assuming, meaning what he's calling projected length of life would be, I'd say, more projected likelihood of recovery from this disease. And that someone who's in a worse case, even if you attach them to the ventilator, they'll survive. Maybe only temporarily. We're not really sure. They have all these underlying conditions and we don't really know, versus someone who's younger. We have a greater statistical likelihood. Other people who have come in the same state with the same underlying issues, put on a ventilator, have been able to recover successfully. That's what he's debating it. Not necessarily on length of years lived, but as likelihood to recover from this particular issue. And he says, so v'kein le'sheladad arofek harov levadai shemizdamen b'mukdam hatzalat chayei olam mutar le'aniach lishhok lishtamesh b'mechona zo k'dei shuchal latzil chayei olam davka da'adiv. And he says, accordingly, a doctor who knows that he or she is going to have other patients come in later in a worse state can withhold the ventilator from person A, give it to person B. He's not addressing whether you can remove the ventilator once you've attached it to, I'm not going to use Jared and Mark because they're real people, but we'll do Joe and Jan, right? Jan is in a worst case medically, and if Jan's attached to the ventilator, she may not survive. She may survive, and Joe is in a much stronger state. If he's attached to the ventilator, he will almost definitely survive. He's saying if Jan comes in, but Joe's going to be coming in any minute now, you can hold off on that ventilator. Similar to what Rav Shlomo Zalman had said earlier. Rav Menashe Klein, in the source number 11, he says the same thing basically. He says, "Devadai ksheyesh lefanenu shnei cholim vadayin ve'ein lanu refuot rak lechad." If we have two people come in, we can only save one of them. Lo naniach shteihan lamud chas v'shalom. It's obvious we can't let them both die, right? And that's what Rav Moshe Sternbach said similarly. It's impossible to believe that Jewish law and Jewish ethics would require you, instead of making a decision, to let both die. He says, obviously, there has to be a decision made. Someone's life has to be saved. To let them both die is definitely not appropriate. I think they're like, I think maybe what he means by cholim vadayin is like vadai that they would die from this. They're like really suffix sakana, or maybe like real sakana. There's a real danger that they're going to die. And so to do nothing, to step back, would be a decision to let both of them die, and that can't be. And he says, I know that can't be because we have a mission in Horiot. Even if we're not going to practice like the mission in Horiot, the value behind the mission in Horiot is that there are certain people that you save before other people. Meaning, Jewish law does not require you to not save anyone. If you can either save everyone or no one, that's not acceptable. Because the mission of Horiot at least tells you the value that you have to save someone. Who we're going to save? The mission of Horiot says who you're going to save. We don't practice like that. But at least it tells you that you have to save someone. To just step back and say, I can't save everyone, so I'm going to save no one, that certainly is unacceptable. So who do you save? He says, in my humble opinion, he says, he says, it seems in my humble opinion that not only according to the Meiri and his fellows, like the Mincha Chinuch, who says that one may save oneself from danger by killing a treifa, and not just himself, but can save another. Meaning, we saw earlier, we started with a recap of this, but 2 weeks ago, or last week, we saw who can say whose life is redder, whose blood is redder. And we saw the Meiri, and we'll scroll back up just to read it again. The Meiri, the Minchat Chinuch in the fourth source says, if you're forced to kill a fetus or they're going to kill you, you kill the fetus. Why? Because the fetus's life is not worth as much as your life. Right? That's what the Mincha Chinuch has said, that in some cases you can choose which life is more valuable. So now, Rav Menashe Klein in this 11th source is saying, in my opinion, that means that what the Meiri believes is that sometimes you can make a determination. Someone who's not going to live for a long time, or who's less soul-like, less alive, is worth less than someone has a greater chance of survival. And he's felt that you were allowed to, you can say, my blood is redder than that person's. I can kill the fetus to save my life because that fetus is not really a person. I can save my life to save and kill a treifa, to kill someone who's going to die anyway, because that person's not really a life. That's what the Rabbi Menashe Klein is saying. That's what the Mincha Chinuch said. And accordingly, then immediately when a shalem shows up, one must remove the machine to heal him. Meaning, if we consider the fact that Jan is probably about to die, Menashe Klein thinks that means the Mincha Chinuch thinks that Jan is less of a life than Joe, who's not necessarily about to die. And because of that, he thinks that you can detach Jan from the ventilator and plug it into Joe, because you're allowed to, Joe's life is worth more than Jan's life, because Jan's on and about to die. So her life is less than Joe. If Jan and Joe were both about to die, you couldn't do anything. But since Jan's about to die, you can disconnect, or you connect the ventilator to Joe because she's barely alive. So that he says that the Mincha Chinuch believes. The Mincha Chinuch who believe that you can sometimes answer whose blood is redder. Joe's blood is redder than Jan's. Jan's about to die. Joe's blood is redder. You can kill Jan to save Joe because Joe's blood is definitely redder. So Menashe Klein says, according to the Mincha Chinuch, you can definitely do that. But even according to the Noda B'Yehuda, and the Noda B'Yehuda who we saw earlier, the Noda B'Yehuda said, you can never choose. Even if Jan is about to die, her blood may still be redder than Joe's blood. You can never, ever make the decision of whose life is more valuable. Rav Menashe Klein says, yes, and Mark's asking, yes, and it's a mitzvah. The Meiri, the Mincha Chinuch will say it's a mitzvah because you have to save Joe's life. By killing Jan, you're saving Joe's life. If you do nothing, Jan will die and Joe may die, and then you've done nothing. But if Jan's gonna die anyway, you've got to remove her from the ventilator and save Joe's life. It's an absolute mitzvah. So the Mincha Chinuch said that, the Menashe Klein said that's for sure okay, because the Mincha Chinuch was walking around saying, I can determine whose life is more valuable. But the Menashe Klein says, even the Nodi B'Yehuda said it's impossible to determine whose blood is redder. You can never say Jan's life is worth less than Joe's life. Even according to him, Menashe Klein says, the Nodi B'Yehuda, who forbade killing a treifa, forbade killing someone who was going to die, forbade killing Jan in order to save Joe, that's only when you're actively killing. You couldn't take a gun out and shoot Jan if it's going to save Joe. But disconnecting Jan from a ventilator is not actively killing Jan. Disconnecting Jan from the ventilator is allowing her to die. And he says, even according to the Nodi B'Yehuda, who says that you can never decide whose life is more valuable than the other, that's only for you actively killing Jan to save Joe. But if Jan's gonna die and you just remove the ventilator and allow her body to die, that's not considered killing Jan. That's called using a resource to save Joe's life. And so he says, even according to the Nodi B'Yehuda, who walked around saying, we can never determine whose life is more valuable, when it comes to removing someone from a ventilator, you can. And so the Menashe Klein, I think he's the only one who says this, certainly the only one that we've seen here, who says, if Jan was hooked up to the ventilator inappropriately, and Joe comes in, and we need that ventilator to save Joe's life, and Jan's probably gonna die anyway, Menashe Klein says, remove the ventilator from Jan. And that's not considered killing Jan. Everyone would agree you have to remove the ventilator from Jan, because that's not killing Jan, that's just allowing Jan to die. If you had a situation where Jan was holding a gun up to Joe and, said, that's a different situation. But, if we're in a situation where you have to actively kill, you'd have to strangle Jan in order to save Joe's life, that we couldn't say whose blood is redder. But in this case, where you're not really actively killing Jan, you're just allowing her to die by disconnecting her from the ventilator, go ahead, disconnect her, you're saving that's called saving Joe's life. I don't know any hospitals that actually, if anyone practices this way, but as far as the halacha is concerned, I think he's probably the minority opinion here. I haven't seen anyone aside from him who says this, but the idea being that you can make that decision of whose blood is redder in this circumstance. And I think the reason that no one really follows this, as far as I know, is because it's a very dangerous thing to start saying. That the force of the Gemara had earlier when it said, who can tell whose blood is redder, seemed to suggest that you couldn't tell whose blood was redder. And to start making this call of, well, this person's life is more valuable than that person's life, it's a dangerous thing to do. And I think most post-game, most halachic authorities try to steer clear of that calculus because it's a very, very tricky one, and it's people's biases are inextricably bound up with those. And so it's hard to say absolutely, oh, they decided that Joe's life was worth more than Jan's life. Did they really mean that, or did they think that Joe is he really more valuable? Is that really, how can you really decide whose life is more valuable? Even if you're going to say statistically Joe should probably live 10 more years and Jan might only live a few more hours, even if with this ventilator, who's to say? Who knows? How could you possibly make that decision on the basis of majority? I think most people will say it's impossible to know absolutely. And so to remove Jan would be tantamount to killing her. Rav Menashe Klein said, no, it's not. It's tantamount to saving Joe. It's not killing Jan. It's allowing Jan to die to save Joe. It's an interesting debate there as far as that. To look at some contemporary postgame, I want to just look at two responsa that were written in the last few months that were sort of put a lot of this all together. One is Rav Hershel Schachter from YU, the other is Rav Asher Weiss in Israel. Cheating, both Rav Hershel Schachter and Rav Asher Weiss probably represent the same approximate place on the spectrum of orthodoxy, but they're the ones who have been writing the most prolifically. So they're the ones that I'm able to find the easiest sources of. But so here's what they say. So Rav Hershel Schachter writes, and I gave you my summary translation here. So if two people show up, one certainly will die and one might die. You save the one who will certainly die. But if one is already attached to the ventilator, even if he is very old and there's a doubt whether it will even help, and someone young comes in this case, we don't push away one life for another. Unlike Rav Menashe Klein, who said, look, this person's old, probably going to die, and this person's young, probably going to live. He says, we can't do that. We don't choose one life over the other once he's already attached to the ventilator. But if at the time that the very old person shows up, they know that in a few hours someone younger will be brought in, and they have a shortage of ventilators, it seems that it is considered at the same time, and we should not attach the older person. Like we saw earlier, quoting the Chazon Ish, said that if they both come in at the same, even if they don't both come in at the same time, but statistically, the younger person, the person with the greater chance of survival is going to be coming in any minute now, any hour now, then that's still considered they're both there at the same time. You don't have to use up the ventilator to save the old person who might not live so long to save the life of the second person. I'm sorry, you don't have to, sorry, let me say that again. You don't have to you don't have to attach the older person to the ventilator if that means you're not going to have a ventilator for the younger person, even if the younger person's not there in front of you right now. And then he says, and of course the Mishnah Horiot, which gives you precedence. An hour or two. It might have been me making a typo. It might have been Shah time. But Sha'ash time, an hour or 2 hours, but yeah. And I think that's what we're dealing with in Corona. We're not, that people are coming in every day, every hour. It's not a matter of we have today and then we might have someone in a few days. People, at least when he was writing this, people were coming in 100 people every day. It was happening every hour, so you're going to have people of various ages being brought in. And he says the Mishnah Horiot, which says you could choose men over women, he says that we absolutely reject, and we saw where he said that and why he said that earlier. He says, the preference for a young person over the old is not due to the fact that the younger person will have I think the English, I translated it, I think, not carefully. When I reread it again, I should have changed this translation. But he writes in the Hebrew, shel zan muflag misukam benogel tza'ir bari, the fact that we choose the younger person over the older person, it's obvious. We'll benefit more if we save the younger person over the older person. It's not due to the fact that it'll have a quantitatively, I wrote qualitatively, but it really should be quantitatively. It's not because the younger person will live a quantitatively longer life than an older person. Deman lemalan she'azakan shichya rakia 5 shanim lo yitrom le'enoshut be'oto zman be'oto 5 shanim yoter me'asher ma sheyitrom hatzair be'arvim shanim shalo. He says it's not about quantity of life, because who can say who's gonna live longer? The younger person could walk out of the hospital and be hit by a car and die, and the older person could walk out of the hospital and live a long life after that. It's impossible to know who's really going to live longer than the other one. This is to my chazit. He says that just because statistically likely, it's not because we know that the younger person is going to live longer. Yes, he is saying that he thinks that even if the older person does more for the community than the younger person, the idea is that the value of life that we give to the person who's the older person, we call that a treifa, that even if they live, they're in such a medical state that even if they survive this, they're probably not going to live another 12 months. Versus the younger person, if they survive this, they probably will live. They have a greater likelihood of living longer. The point is the likelihood of of life. It doesn't have to do with age being, the longer person, the old person, if you say his life, how long is he going to live? 5 years? Because he's already 90 years old. How long is he going to live? 95? The younger person, he's 30 years old. He's going to live another 40 years, okay, so say the younger one, because 40 is more than 5. He says, doesn't have to do with that because we don't know. It has to do with the general statistical point is that the 85-year-old is suffering from corona and high blood pressure and diabetes and these other issues, that the likelihood is that even if they survive corona, they have all these underlying issues that even if we solve this acute problem, there are other things happening that it'll probably mean that this person will likely die within the next 12 months anyway. But the younger person, for whom, let me finish the point and then ask your question out loud. But for the younger person, if they recover from corona, they have no other underlying issues. So there's no reason for us to assume that they could not live longer. So it doesn't have to do with the assumption that older person will live shorter than younger person, but the statistical likelihood that the older person won't recover fundamentally, ultimately from any disease because they're in such a bad state already, where the younger person, being younger, has a stronger body and will likely live longer anyway. You don't know who's gonna die, but the statistical likelihood is that the younger person has a greater chance of longer survival, of survival in general than the older person. Mark, what was your question?
No, I was just going to say, I think what's important here, and I don't know if, I think it's a little bit not, it's sort of in the translation, you don't really get it, is he makes a point is that how do you know that as a Ken Muflag, a really old guy, is not going to contribute more in the 5 years of life he has left than some regular Joe, contributing to the community, he says to enoshut, to humanity, which I think is important, than somebody who's going to live 40 years but do nothing for enoshut, for the human race.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. He's saying that so to say that, look, the old guys. Sorry,
Einstein, how do you know that if it was Einstein and a bricklayer, who's going to do more for enoshut? I don't know.
Right, but he's saying that's not the factor. The factor, because we don't ultimately know. It could be that the 90-year-old is going to do amazing thing. That 90-year-old bricklayer is actually going to end up doing more for humanity than Einstein. We don't know.
So that's why he's saying you can't use that criterion, right?
Correct. So all he says is, I think what he's basing it on is the fact that the older person, even if they recover from this disease, there are more things probably going on that's going to lead to a chaye sha'ah. That's going to lead to, even if they survive this, they have other medical issues going on. Even if they put them onto the ventilator and they can open their eyes, they can have a conversation, but the likelihood is that they have contracted or whatever disease has gotten worse, that the likelihood of them living a meaningful life after that is lower than the younger person who's probably going to be able to bounce back a lot better. You don't know who's going to be able to contribute more. So we can't say, it's not about who can contribute more, it's about the likelihood of being able to get up and do anything afterwards. I think that's what he basically boils it down to. Isn't
he saying it's only when he's talking about where it's only with the person who's going to, oh, maybe I'm sorry. I think I skipped to the wrong place. Sorry. I thought it was basically if that person, the old person, was going to live less than 12 months.
Right. He's assuming, yes, correct. That's what he's assuming. I think part of what the definition of older person for him is underlying issues, which means that if they survive COVID, they're still probably going to die of either complications from COVID or from another disease.
Within 12 months.
Right, but which puts them in the category of treifa.
But an otherwise healthy old person, we don't give them less points than a young person.
Correct. That's exactly. I think that's what Rav Shechter is getting at. Correct.
Thanks.
And he points out that he says, now, if you already hooked up the older person to the ventilator, and by the way, I'll point out just so when Rav Hershel Shechter has spoken about this, he points out that he would consider himself in that Zaken Muflag sort of category. So you shouldn't feel like he's pointing at these old people and saying like, oh, they're probably going to die, and so we don't really care about them. Like, he might be saying that, but he's saying, and I'm also one of them. Like, he has the intellectual honesty to put himself in that camp as opposed to the younger. And he's even so, he thinks that if it's between him and the younger person, he's a massive Torah scholar who could write prolifically and add a lot to the Torah world. He's still saying, but like the likelihood of me being able to go on and to not, with all the other underlying issues that I may have, it doesn't make sense that I would take precedence.
But again, Jared, isn't it? It's only in the case where that person is assumed going to be living less than 12 months. If he's just, if Rav Schechter is just an old guy who
Right.
we don't know how much longer he's going to live. He wouldn't
Right.
say that you give it to the young guy.
Correct.
Okay.
If you've already attached the person, is that he says v'chen nira she'im kvar chibru et hazaken hamuflag leventilator v'char kach hivinu shelo haya kedai. Then they realize that, you know what, this person actually has all these underlying issues, and we have Joe coming in, and Joe is younger, will probably survive better, but we don't have any more ventilators. What do we do with the old guy? He says ki harbet tzirim yavo od shemina nachon l'rofim likba al hazaken hazeh hachlata shel DNR. They should give the person a DNR. Ki lagabe התחלת הטיפול החדש עבור החולה הזקן בנגד לטיפול הצעירים, זה כבר נחשב כבא בבת אחת. He says then, once the person dies, and they're like, oh, well, should we resuscitate them? He says, no, they should put him on a DNR. You don't have to now resuscitate this person. At this point, you have the person who's died, they could resuscitate, or they could use the ventilator and their energy to attach the ventilator to the younger person. He says that's now you have two people in front of you. You have to choice between resuscitating this dead person or saving the life of this younger person. Then you have, that's your out. You can't disconnect the older person, but you can allow when they die to not, ordinarily we'd say you have to jump on it and resuscitate them. He says, but in this situation, you don't have to do that. You could make a hospital could have a policy that says no DNRs, or everyone's on a DNR. You're not resuscitating them. They go, you're done, period. Even though ordinarily we'd say you should, or the person would at least have to opt for that, the hospital has the right and the responsibility to give everyone a DNR. If they're gone, they're gone. You use the ventilator to save someone else now. And he says that he doesn't think he says that's not actively killing the person. He says to remove them from the ventilator while they're alive, that's actively killing them. You couldn't do that. But if they died and you're just giving the resource to someone else, you may be passively allowing them to stay dead, but you're not actively killing them. So that's what Schechter says. You have to give the person with a greater chance of survival the care. If you didn't, you can't then remove the care from person A to person. You can't remove the ventilator from one person to the other person. But if the first person dies, you can save that. We're going to be coding dead people hospitals considered do not resuscitate or for alcohol. But yeah, okay. So yeah, and that's what Schechter is saying. Bin Chas Asher, Rav Asher Weiss, says similarly. He sort of lays this out nicely. There are two factors that have to come into play. One of them is the level of danger and the likelihood of the person being saved. You have to save the more at risk before the less at risk, and you have to save the more likely to be saved before the less likely to be saved. And he says, age is not a factor. I gave you the English, but I'll read the Hebrew explicitly. Gilo shel ha'adam ein lo mashmut u'mishkal ha'chati. There is no halachic value or weight to how old someone is. Rak ha'kotzev chayim l'cholcha yodea v'kovea mi v'kito mi lo v'kito. God's the one who knows how long someone's going to live. The fact that someone is 90 years old, in and of itself, is not a factor. The fact that they're 90 years old and they have all these underlying issues, that may be a factor. But purely age is not an issue. He says, therefore, it's not related to, you can't hang the decision on their age. Kolzo, this is all before they're attached. Can the old person decide for themselves whether they want to give up the ventilator? So it's interesting. That's an interesting question. That could sort of go back to the previous case that we saw before. And I mean, in the last class, that a person has the right to put themselves at risk in order to save someone else. They're not obligated to. I could hear two things. I could hear someone say, look, you could give up the water to save someone else. The Rabbi Kiva says you should drink the water. But if you didn't, we saw all these authorities. Rav Asher Weiss himself said that if you had, society wouldn't function if everyone was caring for their lives so much. You have people who are willing to risk their lives to save other people. That's why you have firefighters and police officers and rescue divers and soldiers and they're willing to risk their life to save other people, and we accept that. So putting yourself, getting off the ventilator, you're like, I think, thinking to the language that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach used. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says you acquired it. So just like you acquired your watch, but you could give your watch to someone else. You acquire the ventilator, you give the ventilator to someone else. Presumably, I would say that you do have that right. You have that right to put yourself in a dangerous situation to save someone else. Yeah, I'd say cases of the Holocaust are probably filled with situations like this where people are willing to risk their lives. And I think we would never require that of someone. I don't think we could ever require that from someone, but someone who voluntarily did that, maybe. I mean, it's funny. I actually heard someone.
Okay.
I could also hear the opposite side of things. I could imagine someone saying, like, we talk about like physician-assisted suicide. We say, well, you're not the owner of your body. If you don't have the right to kill yourself in order to, because you're not the owner of your body. Hashem gave you your body. You just happen to be, occupying your body right now. You're occupying your life right now, but it's not yours. So you don't have the right to then take it. So I could hear someone make the same argument to say, like, well, it's not your call to give up the ventilator. God has decided, halacha has decided that you take precedence. It's nice that you want to save someone else with your body. It's not your call. I can hear someone make that comment also. I don't think that that's probably true, but I could hear someone making that argument to say that you don't have the right to give up your own life in that case. But I think from the first source that we looked at, the first share that we had, and we established very clearly that one might not have an obligation to give up their life to save someone else. It is certainly acceptable and maybe even commendable. Not maybe even, is certainly commendable for someone to give up their life, but under no circumstances is someone required, or should they feel guilty for not opting. So, I don't know, are parents obligated to give up their life to save their children? And from a halachic perspective, I don't know of any halachic literature that says that. It could be. I don't know. Are you thinking of anything offhand, or you're just, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. I mean, I think most parents would say, of course, we'll give our lives for our children. But I don't know if there's any necessarily any pasuk or any statement among the authorities that talk about it. We'll just wrap up. Rav Asher Weiss says, "L'gevei hashela," he says, regarding saving a ventilator, meaning Jan comes in, she's in a very bad state, and Joe's going to come in a much better state, and Joe would benefit more from the ventilator than Jan. So he doesn't go outright and say, absolutely, you can save it. You can save the ventilator. I'll find the actual language that he uses. Someone comes in and they have almost no chance of survival even with the ventilator. You attach it to the ventilator. Someone's going to come later with a greater chance of survival.
Much greater.
Yeah. Tovim beharbe. And he'll die if you don't. You don't have a ventilator. I'm very afraid of saying this, because we're dealing with lives here. But I don't He says, I'm very afraid to say it, because we're talking about life and death situations here. I'm afraid to say it, but it seems to me that you can withhold the ventilator from Jan if you know a statistical likelihood that there's going to be a Joe coming in who's going to have a better benefit from it in the future. And he quotes the Chazon Ish similarly, who said, it's as if Joe and Jan are right before you. Those who make that claim of financial ownership of the ventilator, like we saw Rav Shlomo Zalman said, he says, I don't think that's the case. It's not like the first person had, because then you could say, who has the right, even if they acquired the ventilator, and even if the person died, you couldn't remove the ventilator, because it's his. He acquired it. It's his. You have to use them. You have to save his life and keep him attached to the ventilator. He says, I don't think we're not talking about acquisition of property here. And then he also points out that he thought that Rav Shlomo Zalman was not thinking about practicality. He was just having an intellectual discussion about saving ventilators, but he says, Matzav she'elot elu yu halach l'masa. We never thought that any of these would be practical. We didn't mean a situation where you have limited number of ventilators for people. Who would have thought that that would be the reality? And he concludes, Rabbi Garzan, Rabbi Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, who says, שיש לנתק חולה חסר תקווה ממכונת הנשמה על מנת להשתמש בו לחולה שאפשר להצילו. He says, so Rabbi Zalman Nechemia Goldberg said similar to what Rabbi Shlomo Zalman had said in the brackets that said that if someone is with no hope, maybe you could even detach Jan from the ventilator to plug it into Joe. But he says, yesh lefal pel tuva bidvarav. But you could have a whole conversation. He doesn't go into specifics, but he says that idea of actively removing one person from the ventilator to plug the ventilator onto someone else, says there are those who say that, but there's a lot to discuss there. And to say open, just like, oh, you can obviously remove someone who has no hope and give it to someone else, that he's not willing to say. And he says that there's what to argue about that position. He doesn't go into specifics there. And I don't know exactly what the issues would be that he would say, somewhat probably what we spoke about before. But bottom line here is that these practical cases, the bottom line that everyone is saying is that two people come in at the same time. One has a greater chance of survival and meaningful survival, meaning they're going to survive from this disease and they'll recover to full life. And someone who comes in, they may not recover from the disease. And even if they recover from the disease, there are all sorts of underlying and residual issues that are going to be at play, that the likelihood of them surviving really is slim. He says in all of those cases, the person who has the greater chance of survival comes first. If you made the wrong call, or you made the decision to attach the person who is in a worse state, and now you have the other person coming in, you can't remove the ventilator from that person. And so what that means is that you should hold off giving that ventilator to Jan, because Joe's going to be coming in any minute now. And Joe has a greater chance of survival, and so we're going to attach Joe. But saying purely based on age, everyone is agreeing, and I think Rav Asher Weiss is saying it stronger, more explicitly. Age is not an issue. Schechter said similarly, but he didn't say it as clearly, I think. I think each of them are clear in one aspect and weaker in another aspect. Rav Asher Weiss doesn't seem to acknowledge that an older person may actually have underlying issues. Rav Schechter says an older person does have underlying issues, but either way, the bottom line is the same. Someone who has a greater chance of survival has higher priority than a lower chance of survival, where survival is defined as recovering not only from this disease, but from having no issues whatsoever. And the older person will likely have more underlying issues and more residual issues than the younger person, who might be able to snap back and rebound much stronger. So these are these two very contemporary responsa. The challenge with this is that neither of these have the benefit of years after of contemplation and arguing and discussing. These were written, a few months ago. And so these are really in practical for right now. And we'll see in 20 years from now where the world of medical ethics and halacha is. And I'm sure that these are going to be major factors. But there's a difference between making a decision for policy versus making a decision, like in general, abstract policy, and making a decision for something happening right now. Any questions on these points or any other pieces? I don't know. I didn't see anyone discuss the flu pandemic in 1918. The only things that I've seen that have been sort of floating around the internet are various discussions of, like, I think there was a piece Rabbi Akiva Eger, not in 1918, but another plague. I don't think he was alive in 1918. I think it was a different pandemic. But he talks about not having what's the word? Limited numbers of people who can enter into a shul, and for Yemim Yorim. That I've seen floating around. I haven't seen anyone talking specifically about this. I don't know what technology they had that they had the same likelihood of the capability of sustaining and having people come back to life that we have in 100 years later. I don't know if it was as practical. Someone came in, they were dying. You could maybe give them some treatment, but the likelihood of success was probably equal. I don't know enough to know, but I'm not aware of any response about that specifically. there's stuff related to not medical, but about giving your life for someone else in Mimat Makim, Rav Oshri, talking about the Holocaust response. But again, that's I don't know if there's anything specifically about this that I'm aware of. Certainly, I'll say this: Rav Schechter and Rav Asher Weiss, who probably would have liked to quote someone else who says what they said, didn't have anyone to quote. So either they didn't know of them, or they just didn't have it there, or the results were something that they didn't agree with, so they just bothered not to quote it. But yeah. Any other thoughts or questions on this? Oh, I actually got to run. It's 1:10 already. All right. I hope everyone, we can continue this conversation. I have to tell it on my way.
Sorry.
Okay, we continue the conversation later. Everyone's invited for, I think, 8 p.m. tonight. And see everyone later.
Ciao.
Have a good night. Good day, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too.
Bye.